Captain William Wagner, still hale and hearty at 83 in May of 1939, sat on the front porch of his farmhouse, 1 mile east of Everett, and shared about the colorful days when the Ohio Canal was the chief artery of commerce in this district. As a boy of 11 years, Captain Wagner started work on the canal as a mule driver for his father, Captain Peter Wagner, 2 years after the close of the Civil War. Since the death of his wife, in 1937, the old canalman says he's rather lonesome and welcomes visitors. Mrs. Wagner served as cook for the crew when Captain Wagner was handling his freight boats on the canal.
I remember when the town of Everett was known as Johnnycake Lock. It got that odd name when a number of boat crews, tied up by high water, had to subsist for a week on Johnnycake made from cornmeal when all the other provisions in the district had been consumed. Johnnycake Lock became Everett when the Valley Railroad went through here in 1873. I was born in a log cabin on Oak Hill, Boston Township, and I've spent all my life in this section. Hank Monroe's grocery and supply store at Everett was one of the most thriving places along the canal in the palmy days. His place was an important supply station on the upper division.
At the age of 13, Captain Wagner was graduated from mule driver to steersman, operating principally on short trade boats. His father before him spent most of his life on the canal and boated with James A. Garfield, who later became President of the United States.
The old canal boat called Hit or Miss, on which Father and Mr. Garfield served together, is sunk in the lower basin in Akron, a section now covered by buildings of the B.F. Goodrich Company. The fare included meals for passengers in those days, and I remember Father telling me how the captain used to pay the driver 50 cents extra after leaving 12 Mile Lock to whip up the mules so the boat wouldn't have to serve the passengers an extra meal.
It was an 80-hour trip from Cleveland to Portsmouth, with relay stations for horses and mules every 10 or 12 miles. The average speed was 4 miles an hour. It's pretty slow traveling when one considers the modern methods of travel.
I remember when there were 500 boats on the section between Cleveland and Clinton. The boats averaged 14 feet in width and were 80 feet long. They carried an average load of 75 to 80 tons of freight. The boats would draw 3 feet 6 inches when loaded and about 1 foot when empty. Peninsula was a busy place in those good old days. The town boasted 2 boatyards and 2 dry docks. At every lock along the entire route, there was a saloon, and fistfights were a common occurrence. Some of the boats carried fighting crews or tough hombres. At one time, there were 2,200 boats on the canal, each employing a crew of 5 for a total of 11,000 workers earning their living in the trade. Boatsmen and steersmen were paid $20 a month and keep. Drivers were paid $15 a month. Keep included meals and bunk. Canal boats cost from $1,500 to $2,500. So you can see how much was invested in 2,200 boats. At one time, 3 steamboats were operating on the canal, but they were finally forced off and went into river trade. Canal boat owners objected to the steamers as they washed out the banks. The steamers were finally forced to go into trade on the Ohio and Muskingum rivers.
During the years he served on the canal, Captain Wagner owned and operated at various times 5 boats named the Phil Sheridan, the Ben Harrison, the Cavalier, the Narragansett, and the Evergreen. The canal started in 1825 and was partially opened for commerce in 1827. It required 7 years to complete. Captain Wagner's eyes sparkled as he recounted a memorable battle at Lock 17, when Captain Henderson and his notorious fighting crew were put to flight by a hand-picked crew of 2-fisted scrappers recruited in Canal Fulton.
After the fight, Captain Henderson discharged his entire gang of toughs and employed a decent, hard-working crew.
Captain Warner quit the canal in 1893, 20 years before it was finally abandoned by the state. After he left the canal, he bought a small tract of land nearby and began farming fruits and vegetables.